A weathered limestone slab sits half-buried beneath the dry soil of the Judean wilderness. Its surface is rough beneath the fingertips, cracked by centuries of heat, wind, and silence. Dust gathers inside every carved groove, while the pale stone reflects the first light of morning. At first glance, it looks like nothing more than another forgotten fragment from an ancient landscape. Yet objects like this have preserved some of humanity's oldest writings, waiting through thousands of years for someone to read them again. The Book of Enoch disappeared from the biblical traditions, followed by most Christian communities centuries ago. By the 4th century, church leaders in many regions no longer treated it as scripture, and over time, copies became increasingly rare outside a handful of traditions. Its influence faded from public reading, even though earlier Jewish and Christian writers had quoted it and discussed its contents. Then came an extraordinary discovery. In the 20th century, ancient manuscripts found among the Dead Sea Scrolls confirmed that portions of the Book of Enoch had circulated long before many scholars once believed. Fragments written in Aramaic demonstrated that the text was not a late invention. It had existed centuries before the birth of Jesus, copied carefully by communities that considered it important enough to preserve in the harsh desert climate. Inside those surviving pages is one description that has continued to puzzle readers for generations. The Book of Enoch speaks of 7 extraordinary mountains located at what it describes as the edge of the earth. One of those mountains receives far more attention than the others. According to the text, something unlike anything else in the surrounding landscape is connected with it, raising a question that historians, theologians, and curious readers have returned to for centuries. In the next several minutes, you'll see what the text actually says, how ancient manuscripts preserved this remarkable passage, and why it continues to attract attention today. If ancient biblical mysteries fascinate you, hit subscribe. Every week, we uncover what was removed from Scripture. But here's what makes this stranger. The surviving manuscripts do not present this passage as an isolated vision. Instead, they place it within a larger journey in which Enoch is guided through regions that ordinary people could never reach. The account unfolds with geographical detail rather than poetic language. Valleys are measured, mountains are counted, directions are given. Landmarks appear one after another, as though the writer expects the reader to follow the route. Among the earliest surviving witnesses are Aramaic fragments recovered from the Qumran caves, later compared with the complete Ethiopic version that preserved the entire work. Over the last century, specialists in ancient Judaism and early Christianity have continued examining these texts, comparing vocabulary, structure, and recurring place descriptions to understand how the book developed across different languages and centuries. One detail stands above the rest. Enoch does not simply mention 7 mountains in passing. He pauses. He describes them individually, distinguishing one from the others and assigning it a unique role. The description is careful enough that many readers have wondered whether the passage was intended as symbolic, geographical, or something combining both. Whatever conclusion one reaches, the text itself treats the location with unusual importance. That single mountain becomes the center of one of the Book of Enoch's most intriguing passages. Before we can understand what is said to be connected with it, we first have to examine why the text describes 7 mountains at all, and why their position at the edge of the earth mattered so deeply to the people who first copied these ancient pages. The journey continues without hesitation. Enoch is not shown a single mountain standing alone. He is led through a landscape that unfolds in stages, each location appearing to prepare him for the next. The language remains calm, almost methodical, as though the writer is recording observations instead of trying to impress the reader. That steady tone is exactly what makes the passage so memorable. The Book of Enoch describes 7 mountains unlike any ordinary range. Each one is distinct. Each possesses its own appearance, character, and purpose. Rather than blending together into one enormous chain, they are presented as separate landmarks, occupying an extraordinary region at what the text calls the extremities of the earth. Whether the description refers to a physical location, a visionary realm, or a combination of both has been debated for centuries, but the sequence itself is deliberate. What we're looking at breaks into 7 descriptions. The first mountain is introduced as immense and immovable, establishing the scale of everything that follows. It is presented almost as a fixed boundary, marking the beginning of a territory beyond ordinary human experience. The second mountain differs in appearance. Instead of emphasizing size alone, the text draws attention to its unique surface and its striking presence among the surrounding peaks, suggesting that every mountain serves a different role within the larger landscape. The third and fourth mountains continue the pattern. Enoch carefully distinguishes them instead of treating them as repetitions. Each is described separately, reinforcing the impression that the locations are meant to be recognized individually rather than collectively. By the time the fifth and sixth mountains appear, a pattern begins to emerge. The account repeatedly separates one mountain from another, inviting the reader to notice differences instead of similarities. The landscape becomes less about scenery and more about meaning. Then comes the seventh. The narrative slows. More attention is given to this final mountain than to any of the others. The text lingers over its appearance, describing it as different from everything surrounding it. It is not simply another peak in the distance. It becomes the destination toward which the entire journey has been moving. Ancient readers noticed that shift as well. The complete Ethiopic text preserves the sequence in remarkable detail, while the Aramaic fragments from Qumran demonstrate that this section belonged to a much older tradition. Although portions of the wording differ between surviving manuscripts, the overall structure remains consistent: 7 mountains, with the final one receiving special emphasis. That emphasis has led generations of readers to ask the same question. Why does the narrative suddenly slow down here? Why devote so much attention to one mountain if it is merely another feature of the landscape? The answer begins to emerge in the next section of Enoch's journey. Instead of describing another distant landmark, the text focuses on what is associated with this mountain and why it is treated as sacred within the vision. The account moves away from geography alone and toward purpose. The mountain is no longer important simply because of where it stands. It becomes important because of what Enoch is told about it. That transition changes the entire direction of the narrative. From this point forward, the 7 mountains are no longer just locations to be observed. They become signposts, leading toward one central mystery, one that has kept readers returning to the Book of Enoch for centuries, searching the ancient text for clues about why this final mountain was set apart from all the rest. The 7th mountain does not stand out because it is the tallest. The Book of Enoch draws attention to it for an entirely different reason. As the journey reaches its turning point, the focus shifts away from the surrounding landscape and settles on a single place that is described with unusual care. Every detail seems intentional. Every sentence suggests that Enoch has arrived somewhere unlike anywhere he has seen before. And this is where it gets disturbing. According to the text, this mountain is connected with a substance described as fragrant beyond comparison. Enoch speaks of trees unlike those found anywhere else, and among them is one tree that receives special attention. Its fragrance is said to spread across the surrounding region, surpassing every other scent. The description is calm and matter-of-fact, yet it carries enormous significance within the vision. What we're looking at breaks into 4 parts. First, Enoch describes the mountain itself. It rises above the surrounding landscape and is presented as a place set apart. The language emphasizes separation rather than distance, suggesting that its importance comes from its purpose, not merely its location. Second, the text introduces the extraordinary trees growing upon it. Unlike the forests already mentioned elsewhere in the journey, these trees are described individually. One, in particular, is unlike every other tree Enoch has encountered. Its appearance is remarkable, and its fragrance is presented as impossible to compare with anything known in the ordinary world. Third, Enoch asks about its identity. Instead of making assumptions, he seeks an explanation from the heavenly guide accompanying him. The response is direct. The guide explains that this is no ordinary place, and that the tree has been reserved for a future purpose determined by God. The emphasis is not on hidden treasure beneath the mountain, but on something preserved there until the appointed time. Fourth, the explanation connects the mountain to future judgment and restoration. The guide declares that the righteous will one day receive access to what has been protected, transforming the mountain from a geographical landmark into a symbol of divine promise. This passage has often been connected with the tree of life, described elsewhere in Scripture. While the Book of Enoch never claims that people can reach this mountain in the present age, it consistently presents it as a real location within Enoch's visionary journey. The description is detailed enough that ancient readers copied it carefully across generations. Modern researchers have noticed another interesting feature. The imagery of sacred mountains and life-giving trees appears across several ancient Near Eastern traditions. Yet the Book of Enoch combines these elements in a distinctive way. Instead of presenting the mountain as the dwelling place of competing gods, the text centers everything on the authority of one creator and on a future restoration that has not yet arrived. That difference matters. The mountain is not portrayed as a place where secret knowledge is hidden for a select few. It is presented as a place where God's purposes are preserved until the proper time. The focus remains on patience, judgment, and eventual renewal rather than immediate discovery. As Enoch continues his journey, the vision expands beyond the mountain itself. New locations appear, new heavenly signs are revealed, but the image of that final mountain remains fixed in the reader's mind, a place set apart, a tree preserved, and a promise waiting for its appointed fulfillment. Understanding why later generations debated these passages requires looking at how the text survived, how it was translated, and why it disappeared from many biblical traditions, despite its influence on some of the earliest Jewish and Christian communities. The description of the seventh mountain did not disappear because the passage itself was unclear. It survived because generation after generation considered it worth copying. The greater mystery is not why the vision was written, but how it managed to reach the modern world after so many centuries of uncertainty. But here's what makes this stranger. The Book of Enoch survives today through a remarkable chain of preservation. Large portions of the original work were written in Aramaic before later being translated into other languages. For centuries, complete copies disappeared from most of Europe, leading many people to believe the book had been lost forever. Yet in the highlands of Ethiopia, the text continued to be copied, read, and preserved as part of the biblical tradition of the Ethiopian Orthodox Church. While many other ancient writings vanished with time, this one quietly remained in use. When the Dead Sea Scrolls were discovered near Qumran in the mid-20th century, the conversation changed dramatically. Among the thousands of manuscript fragments were portions of the Book of Enoch written in Aramaic. These fragments confirmed that the work was circulating among Jewish communities centuries before the time of Jesus. That discovery reshaped scholarly discussion, demonstrating that Enoch belonged to a much older literary tradition than many had assumed. Ancient translators faced another challenge. The surviving Ethiopic version is complete, but the earliest Aramaic manuscripts exist only in fragments. Scholars compare these texts with later Greek quotations and other ancient sources to understand how individual words and phrases developed over time. In most cases, the overall meaning remains remarkably consistent, even when small wording differences appear. Here's what the translators left out. Many modern readers imagine that the Book of Enoch describes the seventh mountain as a place where people can travel in search of hidden power. The text does not say that. Instead, several translations soften the repeated emphasis that the mountain and its extraordinary tree are being kept or reserved for a future moment determined by God. That distinction matters because it shifts the focus away from human exploration and toward divine timing. The passage is less about discovering a secret location and more about understanding why access is withheld until the final restoration. The suppression starts at the gradual formation of biblical canons across different Jewish and Christian communities during the first few centuries of the Common Era. As different communities determined which books would be read publicly in worship, the Book of Enoch gradually fell outside the canon used by most branches of Judaism, and later by many Christian traditions. Even so, its influence did not vanish overnight. Early writers were familiar with it, and its themes continued to echo through later religious literature. In Ethiopia, however, the complete text remained part of the biblical tradition, preserving material that might otherwise have been lost. That long history explains why the seventh mountain continues to attract attention today. The passage survived not because every community agreed about its authority, but because enough communities believed it was worth protecting. Every surviving manuscript, every fragment recovered from the desert, and every carefully copied page adds another piece to the puzzle. Yet the journey is still not complete. The question remains whether anything in the modern world echoes the imagery Enoch recorded so many centuries ago. Some researchers point to symbolic parallels, others to shared ancient traditions, and still others to theological themes that continue to shape how these remarkable passages are understood today. For centuries, readers have asked the same question after reaching the description of the seventh mountain. Was Enoch attempting to describe a place that could be found on a map? Or was he recording a vision using geographical language to communicate spiritual realities? The text itself never pauses to answer that question directly. Instead, it continues as though the destination matters less than the message attached to it. Now, here's where it gets active. Over the last decade, interest in the Book of Enoch has expanded dramatically. New digital imaging techniques have allowed scholars to examine damaged Dead Sea Scroll fragments with greater clarity, while fresh translations have made the ancient text accessible to millions of readers around the world. Universities, museums, and research teams continue studying these manuscripts, not because they expect to uncover hidden supernatural locations, but because each fragment helps reconstruct one of the most influential Jewish writings from the Second Temple period. That renewed attention has also encouraged closer comparisons with the rest of the Bible. The imagery of sacred mountains appears throughout Scripture. Mount Sinai is associated with God's covenant. Mount Zion becomes a symbol of His kingdom. The Garden of Eden contains the Tree of Life, a symbol of eternal fellowship with God. When readers encounter the seventh mountain in the Book of Enoch, many notice that these themes seem to converge. A mountain, a sacred tree, a promise reserved for the righteous. Rather than contradicting biblical imagery, the passage echoes ideas that appear elsewhere, though it develops them in its own distinctive way. Now, let me be clear. I'm not saying the seventh mountain described in the Book of Enoch can be identified with a known location on Earth, or that archaeologists have discovered it. But what the text describes, when you look at it carefully, matches a broader pattern found throughout ancient Jewish literature. Sacred geography is often used to express theological truth. Mountains represent meeting places between heaven and earth. Trees symbolize life, restoration, and God's continuing provision. The power of the passage lies not in proving a hidden destination exists today, but in showing how consistently these symbols appear across related writings. What we have to confront is the simplest explanation that fits the evidence. If the Book of Enoch was copied and preserved by Jewish communities centuries before the birth of Jesus, then it clearly held significance for those who transmitted it. If the Dead Sea Scrolls confirmed that substantial portions of the text existed in antiquity, then the work cannot be dismissed as a recent invention. If the imagery of the seventh mountain, the sacred tree, and future restoration aligns with themes that also appear in other ancient biblical writings, then those descriptions deserve careful study rather than casual dismissal. And if generations of readers, translators, and scholars have continued returning to this passage despite differences over the book's authority, then the vision has exercised an influence far beyond the pages in which it first appeared. That brings us back to the beginning. A weathered limestone slab still rests beneath the desert sun. Dust still settles into its cracks. Ancient words remain preserved because someone chose to copy them instead of allowing them to disappear. The seventh mountain remains where Enoch saw it within the vision. The tree remains reserved for the future the text describes. The passage is still there, still inviting careful reading, exactly the way the ancient manuscript has preserved it for centuries. The journey through the Book of Enoch ends much the way it began, not with loud declarations, but with quiet observations that continue to challenge anyone willing to read the text carefully. The vision of the seven mountains is only a small section of a much larger work, yet it has become one of its most discussed passages because it combines geography, prophecy, judgment, and hope into a single unforgettable image. When you step back and look at the entire sequence, a clear pattern begins to emerge. Enoch is not wandering without direction. Every location prepares him for the next. Every explanation builds upon the one before it. The mountains are counted with purpose. The tree is identified with purpose. Even the promise that access is reserved for a future time is repeated with purpose. Nothing in the account feels accidental. For thousands of years, readers have approached these chapters from different perspectives. Some have understood the landscape symbolically. Others have viewed it as a description of realities beyond ordinary human experience. Still others have focused on the theological message rather than the geography itself. Despite those differences, one fact remains unchanged. The text has survived long enough for every new generation to ask the same questions all over again. Perhaps that is why the Book of Enoch continues to attract such attention today. It stands at the crossroads of history, biblical tradition, and ancient Jewish thought. It preserves ideas that influenced later writers, while also containing unique visions found nowhere else. Whether someone accepts the book as sacred scripture or simply as an important ancient document, its historical significance is difficult to ignore. The seven mountains remind us that ancient writers often used physical landscapes to communicate profound spiritual truths. A mountain represented permanence. A tree represented life. A journey represented transformation. By bringing those images together, the Book of Enoch presents a vision centered not on human achievement, but on God's ultimate plan for restoration. That perspective also explains why the final mountain is different from the others. It is not presented as a place to conquer or exploit. It is a place preserved by God until the time He has appointed. In a world where people constantly seek shortcuts to hidden knowledge, the message of Enoch points in the opposite direction. Some things are revealed only when the proper time arrives. What we have to confront is the simplest explanation that fits the evidence. If ancient Jewish communities copied this book with extraordinary care, then they believed it contained teachings worth preserving. If fragments discovered among the Dead Sea Scrolls confirm that these writings circulated centuries before the birth of Christ, then the Book of Enoch deserves to be studied within its historical setting. If its imagery repeatedly echoes themes found throughout the Bible, judgment, holiness, restoration, and the tree of life, then its message belongs in the broader conversation about the religious world of the ancient Near East. And if the vision continues to inspire careful examination after more than 2,000 years, then its enduring influence speaks for itself. Return once more to that weathered limestone slab, resting beneath the desert sky. Its rough surface is unchanged. Fine grains of dust still settle into every crack. The silence around it remains unbroken. Yet the words once hidden inside fragile manuscripts continue to travel across generations, inviting new readers into an ancient journey. It is still there, still enduring, still preserving the memory of 7 mountains at the edge of the earth, still pointing toward the mountains set apart for God's appointed time, exactly the way the Book of Enoch has described it for centuries.